extracts from Peter Ackroyd's book, The English Ghost, Spectres Throughout Time. In Hinton Manor. In January 1765, Mr. and Mrs. Ricketts assumed the tenancy of Hinton Manor in Hampshire. The owner and previous occupant had been Henry Bilson Legg, who, on his death in 1764, had been hailed on his tombstone as enlivened with a peculiar vein of the most striking wit. His daughter, who on her marriage had become Lady Staywell, did not care to reside in the house and was delighted to procure tenants for it. The Ricketts were at first happy in their residence, but they soon became alarmed by the frequent opening and shutting of doors during the dead of night. Mrs. Ricketts feared that there were irregularities on the part of the servants, but having made the strictest inquiries, she was disabused of that notion. When then her husband, fearing that a stranger had obtained the keys of the house, arranged that all the locks should be changed. But the noise of closing or slamming doors continued as before. There were unusual events. Two visitors to the house on separate occasions declared that they had seen a figure in a snuff-coloured coat. The figure had been glimpsed both inside and outside the house. In addition, the servants assembled in the kitchen for a meal observed a woman in a dark dress of silk rushing past them and going out into the yard. A handyman coming through the door at the same time had seen nothing. Then, peculiarly, the manifestations ceased. For 2 or 3 years there were no more abnormal or subsequent night, Mrs. Ricketts heard the front door being slammed with such force that the walls of her bedroom above the hall shook perceptibly. On investigation, the front door was found to be locked and bolted as usual. The unusual episodes increased in strength and frequency throughout that summer. The sounds began before I went to bed, and with intermissions were heard till after broad day in the morning. The noise now included that of human voices. A shrill female voice would begin, Mrs. Ricketts wrote, and then two others with deeper and man-like tones seemed to join in the discourse. She was lying in bed one night when I heard the most loud, deep, tremendous noise, which seemed to rush and fall with infinite velocity on the lobby floor. This was followed by a shrill and dreadful shriek, repeated 3 or 4 times. Mrs. Ricketts now felt that the situation had become dangerous to the health of the whole family and its servants. Her husband was still detained in Jamaica, but by great good fortune her brother, Admiral Jervis, had just sailed into Portsmouth and had determined to visit Hinton Manor. On being told the story, he harbored doubts about any supernatural agency. So, with a friend, Mr. Luttrell, he decided to stay up for several nights with a pistol. They stationed themselves in different rooms and waited. The noises of shrieks and footsteps began as before. Both men rushed out of their rooms, pistols at the ready, but there was nothing visible. Convinced now of the truth of his sister's story, Admiral Jervis advised her to leave the house as soon as possible. She never returned. A small note was added to the transcript of this story. A later resident of Hinton Manor wrote that my mother-in-law, Lady Sherborne, remembers when about 6 years old, circa 1786, while staying at Hinton, being awoke in the night and carried down to the rectory as the noises were so great, Lady Staywell could not remain in the house. The Glass Tube. This is the memoir of Edward Lenthal Swift, keeper of the crown jewels in the first half of the 19th century. In 1814, I was appointed keeper of the crown jewels in the Tower, where I resided with my family until my retirement in 1852. One Saturday night in October 1817, I was at supper with my wife, her sister, and our little boy in the sitting room of the jewel house. The room was, as it still is, irregularly shaped, having 3 doors and 2 windows, which last are cut nearly 9 feet deep into the outer wall. Between these there is a chimney piece projecting far into the room, and then surmounted with a large right shoulder. Observe, there was no mirror opposite to her in which she could, therefore, behold it. Instantly she crouched down, and with both hands covering her shoulder, she shrieked out, "Oh Christ, it has seized me!" Even now, while writing, I feel the fresh horror of that moment. I caught up my chair, struck at the wainscot behind her, rushed upstairs to the children's room, and told the terrified nurse what I had seen. Meanwhile, the other domestics had hurried into the parlour, where their mistress recounted to them the scene, even as I was detailing it upstairs. There is a postscript to this story, again recounted by Mr. Swift. It took place a few days after the apparition of the glass tube. One of the night sentries at the jewel house, a man who was in perfect health and spirits, and was singing and whistling up to the moment of the occurrence, was alarmed by a figure like a huge bear issuing from under the jewel room door. He thrust at it with his bayonet, which struck in the door. Even as my chair had dinted the wainscot, he dropped in a fit and was carried senseless to the guardroom. When, on the morrow, I saw the unfortunate soldier in the main guardroom, his fellow sentinel was also there, and testified to having seen him at his post just before the alarm, awake and alert, and had even spoken to him. I saw the unfortunate man again on the following day, but changed beyond my recognition. In another day or two, the brave and steady soldier, who would have mounted a breach or led a forlorn hope with unshaken nerves, died at the presence of a shadow. I trust you have enjoyed my short couple of tales from Peter Ackroyd's book, The English Ghost. It's an intriguing collection of so-called documented factual accounts of ghosts in the British Isles over the centuries. One can speculate as to what ghosts could be or are, but they always leave one with a chill. But remember, ghosts are what we bring to them. They can be friendly as well as terrifying. So please, sleep well, and thank you for your time.